Well, thank you again. What a delight and honor it is for me to welcome Brad Smith from the Brad Smith Schools of Business.
I'm not
We're
used to that. Is this on,
really-
by the way, or do I need to turn it on?
Turn it on. Just
All
that,
right.
that
So
one.
don't worry about me. I just run a technology company. I have no idea what we're doing. Oh, it's called a button. Thank you.
So what we'll do is we'll get started right away, and we will have an hour and a half with us to talk about some of the most fundamental changes, to learn from Brad about what's going on in the world of business, what's going on in the world of higher ed from his perspective, and how Marshall can play a role in that. I'm going to start off with some questions that we have received from our faculty and staff. While there were several questions that came back, there were similar themes. I've clustered them. And so when I ask these questions, they are reflective of what we have received from everyone here. I hope it's not making too much of a... So the first thing that I'm going to ask you, Brad, is what is the best thing you felt about going to Marshall? Let's talk about your time at Marshall and what was the best thing about it.
Well, I actually project pretty well, so I don't know if you need a microphone
Maybe
or not. I'll let you make
can
the
leave
call
it
on
right
that.
here. I don't know if that's maybe a more fixed thing is better than something that's moving.
Can you hear me okay? Yes. All right, there we go. That's better than the background noise. So that sounds like it's going to be a little bit of a squeal too. How about if I turn it off? Now, if we project our voices, will that be sufficient?
Yes. All right.
Good. All right. Nothing like a plan B. So for me, I felt like at Marshall I was a part of something bigger than myself, and I think many of you know the story now, but I was 6 years old when the plane crashed in 1970, and I live in Canova, so the Tri-State Airport is right there. And my dad had one of those police scanners, CB back then, so we could hear all the noise and all the things going on, and my cousins were a part of the volunteer fire department that showed up at the scene. So it was very much a part of my family's life. And then I had my uncle and my aunt, both of my brothers, my nephew, my niece, and everyone graduated from Marshall. So I always felt like I was a part of a cause greater than myself. But for me, why I'm really proud of Marshall, and why I was so proud of Marshall back then, is that we are an example of the #1 predictor of success, which is perseverance and grit. We rose from those ashes, and we basically were able to achieve the next chapter of glory. If you read the book by Angela Duckworth, it's a 30-year study on the #1 predictor of success. Is it IQ? Is it EQ? And the answer is no, it's perseverance. And Marshall University is that plus more.
That's fantastic, and that's exactly what we see in our students every day, and it's grit and perseverance that takes us forward. If you were a student, knowing what you know now, what other classes would you have taken?
Oh, well, first of all, many of the classes that I think we need, especially as we look to the future, may not have been offered back then. When I went to school, we had BASIC, COBOL, and Fortran. So, there's some things that have changed since 1982 to 1986. But if I go back to the classes that were offered, I wish I would have spent more time in business statistics and analytics. That is one of the most foundational skills that anyone needs going forward. Everything is going to be powered by data. You need to seek truth in the data, and so I think that is a fundamental skill. But if you look ahead, most people now say the 4 Ds are the foundational skills that everyone's looking for. Those 4 Ds are data analytics, #1, design thinking, also known as hypothesis-driven thinking, something we'll be talking a lot about here. The third is clearly developing, so it's a development acumen, whether you write code or you understand how code is written. And then the fourth is the arts and design, because as you look at it, it's not the most sophisticated technology that wins, it's the easiest to use. So if you take those 4 Ds, it's data, it is design thinking, it is design as a craft, and it's development. And those things are foundational for the next chapter.
That's interesting. We are in the process of redesigning our curriculum, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level, and so any of these insights is exactly what we need to take the curriculum forward. Let's talk a little bit about your leadership experience and style. So let's think about, when you started in your first job, did you ever dream or think that you would be a CEO?
No, I never imagined, first of all, that I'd ever have a skill set that would even allow me to be considered for something like that, and certainly not a company as great as Intuit, which I'm in love with. When I was growing up, I had two dreams. I wanted to be a marine biologist because I lifeguarded at Dreamland Pool every summer. And even though there were no fish in the water, I imagined it must be cool to be swimming where the fish are. And then the second thing I thought about is I wanted to be a journalist. I write poetry, I try to write songs, and so I love journalism. My favorite piece of literature is John Milton's Paradise Lost, so I'm a little bit of a geek when it comes to English lit. And when I graduated from Marshall, I had two job offers, one from the Herald-Dispatch and the other one from Pepsi to be a part of the management training program. And I sat down with my dad and I said, I don't know which job to take. And he was sitting in the back porch swing with me and he said, well, I want you to think about three things. Choose the thing that makes your heart beat the fastest. Work in a company that will surround you with people smarter than you, so you'll constantly be learning. And do not take the job for a title or money, because both of those will change over time. Now you might think, okay, great. He knew he always wanted to be a journalist. He went to the Herald-Dispatch. But I actually stepped back and thought about what my dad said. And if you know anything about my life story, I was bullied in the 9th grade. And it was a horrible year for me, and I lost the fight. And I went home and my dad enrolled me in martial arts. So from 9th grade to 12th grade, I got a black belt. But halfway up the black belt rank, you become a student teacher. And I found something about myself that I never knew. I loved watching my students advance. I got more thrill out of watching them become great than I did out of me actually progressing in my belt. And so when I answered my question that my dad asked, I wanted to be a great people manager. I wanted to bring the greatness out in others. And so I went to work for Pepsi, and the rest of it was history. I still write poetry. Not very good poetry, but I write poetry.
So, on those lines, how do you bring out the best in your employees?
Well, I have a philosophy, which we now shared into it, that a leader's job is not to put greatness into someone, but to recognize everyone is born with an innate greatness. Our job is to create an environment where their greatness can emerge. And so for us, and what we do at Intuit, and what I've tried to do is create that environment. And the first thing that you need to do is create hope that there's a better tomorrow. It can be a grand challenge, like let's put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him safely to Earth, which John F. Kennedy did. Or it could be, how do we actually solve this opioid crisis? But it's something that inspires something that's great and grand that you have to really think differently about. Then the second thing you do is you create an environment where success and failure are treated equally, which is a chance to learn. And that's what design thinking is. It's an experimentation culture. Thomas Edison famously said, I did not fail 10,006 times. I proved 10,006 ways that it wouldn't work. And that is the critical success factor. And then the third thing is, if you have an environment of experimentation, then it's the meritocracy of ideas, and people want to work in a company where their idea has just as good a shot of being funded as somebody else who has a lot of stripes on their sleeve. So if you create that environment, you basically create a 36-year-old startup where everyone feels like they're an owner, everyone has a chance to change the company's trajectory, and everyone has a chance to put a dent in the universe. And that's what I've tried to do.
That's the kind of thing that makes an organization great. Clearly, Intuit has been special. Being in the top 100 workplaces for the past 17 years is a huge accomplishment. How would you describe the corporate culture at Intuit?
Well, I think we just touched on it. It's really three things. We are a 36-year-old startup. There are 9,000 employees. All 9,000 are trained on design thinking. Whether you're in HR, you're legal, you're finance, you're an engineer, everyone runs experiments. Whether it's a new candidate experience, if you're hiring into the company like Izzy Rogner, or you're a finance person figuring out how to deliver a better message to investors, everyone runs experiments. They test the results. So we're all an experimentation culture where we're owners and entrepreneurs. The second thing we do is we create an environment where we understand kindness is not weakness. We treat people with dignity and respect. We really believe you can be tough on the issue and kind to the human being, and that makes us a different company than most. And then the third is we're customer obsessed. We do follow me homes, which, by the way, I will tell you is not market research, it is ethnography. It is actually observing the individual in their natural environment, watching them use your product to do their taxes while the dog runs in, the kid's asking for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and the doorbell's ringing. And it's only then do you see what actually happens with the program when they stop midstream and then come back and can't remember where they are. And so we do that, and as a CEO, I did 60 hours a year. Every employee does follow me homes, and then you get a deep empathy and an emotional attachment to the problem you're trying to solve.
This is exactly what the D for D has brought us into. And yesterday we had our West Virginia Business Innovation and business model competition, And we had all these students using, or at least trying to use, some of these methods as they come up with new business ideas.
Sure.
But there is a long way to go, and these ideas are kind of taking us into the next generation, and I think it's spreading across the state.
I love it.
Let's talk about the current business environment, the way you see it as a CEO. What do you think are the 3 most important current business trends?
Well, first let me ask, are you still able to hear me back in the back? I know I'm projecting my voice, so the front is like, man, he's screaming. The back's okay, I can hear him. There really are 3 major trends. I just got back from Sarasota, Florida, where we meet as a business council 3 times a year. This group's met since 1878. They meet with the administration once a year. This time we actually had former President Bush and his brother Jeb talking about the legacy of their father. But it's the CEOs you would know, Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook and all the different leaders, Mary Barra from GM. And we talked about 3 fundamental trends. The first is artificial intelligence and machine learning, because it's disrupting productivity and it's disrupting business strategy. It is not going to eliminate a whole bunch of jobs wholesale. In fact, the data suggests that 60% of all jobs will have about a third of their work automated. So it will require us to reskill and redeploy, but it won't necessarily say, hey, we've completely eliminated complete categories of jobs. So artificial intelligence and machine learning. The second is platforms and ecosystems. And now the world has shifted away from just completing a transaction to facilitating interactions. Think of Facebook, think of LinkedIn, think of Amazon with Amazon Web Services. Intuit now, where you have TurboTax and the ability for a CPA to come in with a one-way video and answer your question and then go away and you finish the work. It's basically the more people who contribute, the more value is created. And then the third and final piece, after you go with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and then platforms and ecosystems, is the opportunity to step back and think fundamentally different about business models. And business models come in lots of ways, but today the business model disruptor is crowd. So the crowd is where you literally have somebody else do something for you that you might have paid an employee to do. And a great example is TurboTax right now has 40% of all of its customer questions answered by another customer. It's called Ask the Community. And the accuracy of their answers are higher than our own employees. So the wisdom of the crowd never be underestimated. Uber did it, by the way. They hired people who said, you have a car, Airbnb, you have an extra room, just go ahead and rent it. That's the power of the crowd.
That's amazing. You know, we would obviously have to think about how we use these ideas in higher ed, and how does higher ed think about or use some of these design thinking principles and crowd-based knowledge. But let me come back to the 3 business trends you talked about. You know, in order to respond to these new trends, you would perhaps sometimes need to change the way your teams and your management are working in the company.
Yes.
Responding to those trends requires changes in plans, changes in action. How do you make that change happen? And minimize the resistance to change?
Well, I think everyone here knows, and we experience it ourselves, everyone's for change until it happens to them. Then they're not so big fans of change anymore. And one of the things that we have learned to be most effective is to remind your teams to fall in love with the problem and not the existing solution. The best way to do that is to ask 3 questions. Anytime anybody has an idea in our company or in the technology sector, the first question their manager usually responds with is, tell me 3 people outside of our industry who solved this same problem and tell me what you learned from them. And then the second question you ask is, tell me 3 people in our industry who is solving this problem and what did we learn from them. And then the third is, tell me 3 ideas you considered and I want to hear about the 2 that you eliminated before you tell me about the one you're so excited about. Because what happens is the reason why doctors actually get a second opinion, or patients, is because you start to develop lock-in, you fall in love with the solution, you have pattern recognition, it's a shortcut, and you end up seeing everything as a nail, and therefore everything's answer is a hammer. The only way you break out of that is these go broad questions, which by the way was developed by the Toyota production system. It's the Japanese model, which is to go broad before you go narrow. That, by the way, enables you to no longer be in love with your solution, but to fall in love with the problem, and you'll discover there are lots of other ways to solve the problem.
That's interesting. Let's think about your perspective to higher education. You know, where do you see higher education headed in this country? What are some of the things that we can use from the world of business, best practices from Intuit, into the world of higher education?
Well, I think we have to first get grounded on what is the value of education and what is its purpose. And As you know, it's a passion that I have. I've always felt the only reason I was ever able to do anything in my life is because I had parents who sacrificed, and I had a crowd of people who saw something in me that I still don't see in myself, and they invested in me. So I happen to believe the two great equalizers in life are education and entrepreneurship. And I'm happy to talk about both at any point in time. But when it gets back to education, if you read the book by Ted Dintersmith, which is What Schools Could Be, or What Education Could Be, I think something like that's the name of the book, he goes back and studies the origin of today's education environment. Many of you already know this, but it was really designed in the late 1800s to get us prepared for the manufacturing age, the Industrial Revolution. So we ring bells every 45 minutes to teach kids how to follow instructions. And then we basically taught them how to memorize and then go and apply. That's not today's world. 90% of today's business models succeed on their second idea, not their first. 90% of all ideas fail on their first iteration. So we need to start to evolve our education system, I believe, to be a lot more iterative, a lot more evidence-based, a lot more prototypes, trial and error, and step away from what historically may have been the success model of the past. And that's what many of our employers are now saying. So you're starting to see alternatives pop up. You see coding boot camps pop up. You see all kinds of online and in-person curriculum. And so I actually my hypothesis is I think the 3 C's will be important going forward. The first is a connected classroom. Give the people the choice of being online, on-site, or on campus. And on-site could be an extension facility that's closer to their home. And on campus, of course, would be in one of our campuses like Marshall. So that's the connected. The second thing I think is important is to begin to think more about competency and less about credit hours. Are you competent in the capability and the skills? And if you can get that done fast, you don't need to spend as much time. If it takes you a little longer, take a little longer. And then the third, I would say, after those two, is completion. Completion for me is, it's just as important not to have a lot of people enroll, but to have people actually graduating. And so how do we have the mentorship, the coaching, the counseling to do that? Now I know I just put down the big gauntlet, and I am a non-educator, and so I am sure that's going to bring a lot of good, conversation up, but for me, those are the things that, at least as I talk to my peers, or I think about the education that I wish people coming into our company had, those are the 3 things.
When we look at some of the schools we are trying to benchmark with, having discussed some of those names with you and gotten these names from some of them as well from you, I think that's exactly some of the directions that we need to think about.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges for us as a college will be to reorient not only our curriculum, but what our students do outside the classroom in terms of working with experiential learning and companies and so on. So what is the role of out-of-classroom actions? How much, what is the role of experiential learning in a business school as you see it into the future?
Well, one of the things I always loved about Marshall, especially the size of Marshall, was it promoted engagement and interaction. So I loved our professor-to-student ratios because we had a lot more classroom discussion. And many of my peers who showed up from these big universities who sat with hundreds of people and had a graduate student teaching them, they don't have a lot of the skills that Izzy and some of us who came out of Marshall have, because we had interaction with each other and with professors. So the first thing I love about our size is interaction in the classroom, but the second is interaction in the community. And one of the things design thinking does is we have a lot of small businesses and businesses sitting right here in Huntington and the surrounding area who could use help. Why would we ever do a case study to have a student invent a brand or a company when we could actually go down the street and adopt a company and actually try some of the things that we think would be relevant with them and see if we can help improve the business success while we teach the student? So that's one of the things about experiential learning is you actually do your things in the wild. You don't do them in a laboratory. You go out and do them in the wild. And if they don't succeed, there's no better lesson, and you pivot quickly because you want to help that business succeed.
That's so helpful. As a business leader, what skills do you expect our future graduates to come with into the organization?
Well, I talked about the 4 Ds. By the way, this is not, I am a huge believer in liberal arts, and I believe in STEAM, not STEM. If the arts are missing, it's a life not worth living. And quite frankly, technology will not be adopted. People have got to have fun and have positive emotion and believe that it's creating a better life. That's why the Apple outperforms the Android. The Android is much more sophisticated technology, but everyone can pick up an Apple iPhone and be pretty sure they know how to use it, including little 3-year-old kids. So the arts are important, liberal arts are important. So the 4 Ds are going to be foundational, though.
Sure.
Just as we had to learn to write in cursive, even if we didn't choose to be poets and we weren't sitting there writing in scribe anymore, we knew how to write in cursive. The next generation needs to understand code, if not how to write code. So the 4 Ds, so developing, design thinking, design as a craft, and data analytics. But after that, the 2 most important skills that I test for and we look for are curiosity quotient and collaboration skills. Learn-it-alls versus know-it-alls. People who truly have an intellectual curiosity about the world around them. And collaboration skills, social media is quickly eroding these skills faster than we can count. And if they can't come in and be a part of a team environment and help the team around them get better, they really struggle. And today, nothing can be done. No company can succeed without partnering with other companies. So those 2 skills are important, curiosity quotient and collaboration skills.
So when our students come out, one of the challenges that universities face is how do we produce career-ready graduates from day one? So when they come out, they're ready to contribute to their workplace from day one. We also see that companies have been cutting down on training budgets in a lot of different contexts. And so the expectation from universities is to produce more career-ready graduates. Where is that role? How do you see higher education and corporations come together to create these skills in students who will be able to contribute to the workplace from day one?
Yeah, first of all, you're going to have to forgive me. I have a hypothesis on many of these questions, but I don't have the answers. This is your profession. You're so much better, and you're clearly experienced at this. I've just been on the other side of the equation, bringing these kids in and hoping to help them grow and develop in ways that we see the world going. So please, this is a partnership, and don't act like I have all the answers, or don't let me act like I have all the answers, because I don't. And besides, anyone who borrows from me steals twice, because I've never had an original idea. You used to call it plagiarism, I call it benchmarking. So let me go back to, as I've spent the last 5 years knowing that this point in time in my life would come where I wanted to step away. By the way, my master's thesis when I went to Aquinas College in Michigan was to some way be able to come back home and work with Marshall and think about the next chapter for the state of West Virginia. So this has been my goal since my 20s. And that is not to say that I have answers. I simply want to be one of many that leans in and tries to think about this. But if you look at the education system today, our founder, Scott Cook, is really focused on early childhood development, 0 to age 3. The reason why is every second 1 million neurons are being formed, and they have determined by age 3 they can do a test, and they can tell based upon where the kid is that when they show up in kindergarten what their likelihood of graduating high school is, let alone going to college. So if you don't have that interaction and that sort of formative learning at 0 to 3, they're already behind. By age 5, they're behind a year and a half. Now imagine in 5-year-olds, a year and a half is a lot. And then you start to lose your confidence. It's the Pygmalion theory. Then we got K through 12. And I have a theory of the case here, and especially because of where I came from, we have lost our respect for people who build things with their hands. We've lost our respect for the vocations and the trades. Today, we have to make all of our phones in China because you can take all the skilled tool and die makers in the United States and you can fit them in one basketball gymnasium. China takes 100 football fields for theirs. So we don't respect that anymore. Massachusetts has an entire generation of electricians retiring and no one to take their job. So I really believe we need to bring vocational trades back into the schools so that kids graduate with either a trade or a desire to go to college. This 4-year college and bust, I think, has gotten us into a little bit of trouble. And then I think, as we talked about, universities have a chance to reimagine, or certainly Marshall as we talk about it, but there's an opportunity to think about it in more modular. And I've been studying things like at BYU, Idaho, was a school that came from Rick's College and turned into BYU, Idaho, Southern New Hampshire University. They've been building curriculum that are modular, that if you decide to stop after 2 years, you actually have a certificate and you can go out and you can get a job, or if you go on to 4 years. So it's literally built in a way where you're not a college dropout. You can do something with what you've achieved. And I think there's just a way to rethink that. And the neat thing is others are doing it and it's succeeding. And I'm happy to share some of that at some point.
Coming back to design thinking, how can we use design thinking to improve higher education?
Well, I know what we've experienced in our company. We just had the best year. We're a 36-year-old company. We are a $60 billion market cap company, and we had our strongest year last year in 36 years. And that's because we treated every day as day one. 9,000 people showed up and ran experiments. 1,800 experiments were live in the company at any point in time. They produced $400 million in revenue from products that I never even sanctioned. They came from the experiments, and I simply said, well, that's a winner. Put money down on that. Made us look smart. But the employees were actually doing all this. So we have to unleash the greatness in our people. So what are the things I think higher education and design thinking can do? The first is create an environment where design thinking and experimentation become the norm. That's one. The second is begin to transition away from pass-fail into basically learning that allows you to get the idea better and improve. And I know that takes some rethinking, but there's some schools that have been doing it, including Babson College, which is pretty interesting because they teach entrepreneurship. Yeah. I think that's the second. And then the third, I think, is to really help us figure out how to get it as a part of the community where it's evidence-based outcomes and not spreadsheets and assumptions, where we truly get to try this in the wild. Every employer would love to have free employees. That's why we love internships so much. But if you actually make it a part of the curriculum and have the students run their projects out there, they get free resource, and the students actually get to see if it's going to work in the wild or not. So those are the things I think could be outcomes.
That's fantastic.
Am I wearing you out with my answers, by the way?
No.
All right. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I can get a little excited.
This is great. This is great. Let's come to your gift and support for Marshall. You know, it's one of the largest gifts in the history of the university. It is a transformative gift for us, and it is going to completely reshape how we act, what we do, and how we succeed. First of all, what made you support us?
Because I love you.
Thank you.
I do. Anyone who's checked out a Facebook page or any interview I've ever done, I've had Marshall shirts on that say, I may live in California, my heart belongs to the Marshall Thundering Herd. I tell you, anything I've ever achieved is because you believed in me and you gave me a gift and you created in me a belief that there was something out there that I could contribute. I happen to believe education is a great equalizer, and as I mentioned, entrepreneurship is an opportunity, and I think Marshall is a gift. It's a very rare situation. None of my peers have as much affinity for their school than Marshall grads do. Period. I'll tell you two stories very quickly, if I may. They get a little personal. So the first is my brothers and I all wear the ring. Anybody heard the reason why? My mom and dad didn't get to go to college. They had the gift of my older brother when they were seniors in high school. And my dad did what he wanted to do. He dropped out, joined the Army, got a GED, and he and my mom raised my older brother and my two younger brothers. And they had a commitment to us. They would get us all to school. And they paid off in that commitment. They got all three of us through Marshall University. 1996, my dad, who was at the time mayor of Canova, West Virginia, saved up his money, 18 months, and bought 3 class rings of the same size and gave it to us on Christmas morning. The next day, as I was flying back to New Jersey, he drove me to the Tri-State Airport, and I didn't know, but on the way home, he had a heart attack and he passed away at the age of 58, the day after he gave us the ring. So my brothers and I wear these rings because we love Marshall, and our mom and dad kept a promise. The second thing that I do this for is because Marshall University, oh, I'm sorry, I was going to tell the second story, right? Business Week, a couple years ago, had decided that Intuit had a very unique culture, and they were trying to choose between us and one other company to have the actual feature cover story with the CEO on the cover. And they came in and they had a professional photographer taking pictures. And after about 15 minutes, the photographer said, Mr. Smith, I really think your company has a chance, but I have to tell you, our editor hates jewelry. Can you please remove the ring? And I said, I cannot. We did not get the cover. We got a 5-page spread, but the picture has me like this with the ring. So my love for Marshall is not only because I love what you gave me, but I love what my mother and father gave my brothers, and I love what we stand for. So that's why the gift. Sorry for being so long-winded.
No, this is... So, you know, with your support, we are daring to dream big. We are talking about, you know, creating new programs, a new curriculum, getting more nationally ranked and recognized. And this is all a collaboration between all of us here and all our stakeholders, alumni, board members, you, of course, and so on. This is a big change. It's a disruptive change in many ways. But we are trying to break away from where we are as a college and as a university to the very next level. And we think we can do it. There's a lot of good conditions around us. And again, you have been the biggest supporter of that in order to make it happen. So the question is, with such disruption, how would you handle a smooth transition and make sure everyone is on board? What do you think are some of the things we need?
Well, there was an article written in Fortune magazine in June 2016, and the opening sentence in the article was, "Why isn't Intuit dead?" Now, of course, I was still CEO. I thought I'd better read the article. It could have been my epitaph, a little premature. But the author, Jeffrey Colvin, went on to say, because Intuit has the courage to serially disrupt itself, something only a handful of companies have done: Amazon, Netflix, Intuit. And he studied these companies, and he said they share three characteristics. First, they view themselves the way a disruptor would view their business. So they don't beholden themselves to yesterday, they think about tomorrow. The second is they have the willingness to drive change even when the sun is shining. So they drive the change even if the things are performing well today. And the third is they do it time and time again. So he wanted to come and follow us and figure out, doing his own Follow Me Home, how does Intuit do this? And so he shadowed me for a period of time, and he wrote a follow-up article, and his answer was because everyone owns the change. So I would say the first thing that we've learned about driving change is no one gets to be an observer, and be careful of just giving it to a committee. So let me give you an example. We formed 3-person teams called Action Learning Teams. Everyone in the company went out and we posed the 10 big questions, and you got to choose which question you wanted to study. In this case, you may choose universities we want to go study, and 2 or 3 of you go together. And you go out and you observe them, and then you come back, and the second thing you do is you write a 6-page narrative. Now, we're all scholars and we all publish, so a 6-page narrative is an Amazon term, which is facts per second. You have to remove the hyperbole and the opinion. You have to actually type in the observed facts and things that you saw, and you write it up as a narrative. Then you bring them in as a group, and you have a protagonist and an antagonist argument over each of the issues. So you get to hear the pros and the cons. It's not groupthink. At the end, you actually use a process where you say, okay, based upon everything we've heard, what are the 3 to 5 biggest things we think we need to do? And once everyone's landed on that, you're still going to have outliers. And then you go around the room and you ask 3 questions. Can you agree and commit? Can you disagree and commit? Or where are you going to go work? Because you can't have somebody not be a part of the process. And I know that sounds incredibly ruthless. And by the way, very few people get to the where you're going to go work. Most people, look, I disagree, but at least my voice has been heard. I've put it on the table, but I realize we all have to be rowing in the direction, so I'll go ahead and support it. So it really is agree and commit and disagree and commit. But the most important thing out of that change, Avi, is the first thing that you'll come back with is a lot of what we're doing is already great. And so you want to first declare what won't change. Hey, we questioned everything, but there's a lot of special things about Marshall. Right. And that's what we all signed up for. So you first declare this won't be different. But then you say these are things that will be different, and how are we all going to be a part of it? But the most important thing is everybody's voice is a part of it, no observers.
That's fantastic.
Now that's your choice whether you choose to go that way, but that's the process that we've used.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure. You know, we know that you're passionate about West Virginia. It's very dear to you. You're from the state. You're coming back. Marshall is a big part of the state. How do you see a university like Marshall contributing to the bigger cause of development and turnaround in the state?
I would start by saying we should not strive to be a bigger version of what already exists. We should be the prototype for what doesn't exist. I know we have a neighbor to the north that likes to remind us of the land-grant university, and I know recent comments suggest that, size matters, but if you study Rudyard Kipling, it is not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. Mm-hmm. That is the law of the jungle. I love our size. We don't have to be this size, but we aren't going to get to the bigger size, I believe, with that shadow coming down from others if we try to just be a bigger version of what we are. I would encourage you to read Clay Christensen's book, Disrupting Universities. I just finished it. He's the one from Harvard who's written about disruptive innovation happening all over the world, Innovator's Dilemma, Innovator's Solution. He doesn't have all the right answers, I'm sure, but as a Harvard professor himself, he was able to objectively say what's wrong with the model. And so what I would love to see Marshall do is to become the prototype for the aggregation of the world's best practices under one roof. And if you study Steve Jobs and you look at the iPod and the iPhone, 17% of the iPod was original technology built by Apple. The rest were the best practices of others, and he simply played the orchestra and got it to come together in a way no one else did. That's a good thing today. So we say in experimentation, the best experiment to run is one someone already ran for you. Let's go get that, bring that in, get another one and bring it in, and think about a completely different model. And by the way, if you do that, it drives growth. We will get bigger. We just would be a different version of who we are.
You know, one of our biggest challenges in the shrinking demographics of the state is the population around us.
Yeah.
You know, it's harder and harder for us to get college-ready graduates coming out of the high schools and grow as a university. We are going to be more focusing on non-traditional students, online students, international students, and various segments of the student population around the world. How do you see that fitting into the mission and to the future of Marshall?
You know, this is an interesting challenge. And our state is declining in population, one of only a half a dozen, I think, in the United States. And so I think there's two things I would put into context before I offer some perspectives. The first is something that I call the 75% reality. This was just a topic of discussion at that business council I referenced a few minutes ago. The 75% reality is this: 75% of today's adults believe the future will be worse for their kids. That is the first time in over 100 years that that's been the case in the United States. The second 75th percentile reality is 75% of all venture capital money last year went to California, New York, and Massachusetts. 75%. So they are not egalitarian in handing out opportunity. The third 75% is 75% of all new jobs that are being created in startups. So if you take those three, West Virginia is not alone in believing the world is not going to be brighter tomorrow. 75% of the world's feeling that way. Venture capitalists are sticking their money in other places, and yet the power of the future is entrepreneurship. Then I think our opportunity is not to get lost in the reality of the population. Today, the world's population is growing at 1.1%. The U.S. is growing at 0.7%. West Virginia is declining. But here's three creative ideas for you. Came across one last week. Anybody heard of Tulsa Remote?
Yep.
Have you?
Yep.
Raise your hand if you heard of Tulsa Remote. Okay. By the way, Vermont's doing this too, and what I love about Tulsa Remote, they borrowed the idea from Vermont and made it better. There's a podcast, you can look this up right now. So here it is. Yeah, he who steals from Tulsa steals twice. So this is the cool thing. So Tulsa's mayor has tried for 10 years to get people to relocate to Tulsa, but they could not compete against Nashville and Orlando and Houston and all these up-and-coming next-generation cities. So they tried something different. They found out 40% of the United States' workforce that work for Amazon, Intuit, and others are remote employees. They are paid by another company, but they're allowed to live anywhere in the U.S. because they don't have to go to a job. And so Tulsa put out an ad. We will pay you $10,000 to move to Tulsa. And guess what? They thought they were going to get about 100 applicants. They got 10,000. So they went ahead and said, we're going to have to build on this idea. So they created a WeWork space. I don't know if you're familiar with WeWork, but now it's a company that sets up a building, and one or two employees from all different companies can come in, and they're like a beehive. Even though they're over there working on Apple and Amazon, they're sitting next to each other, and they share a facility. They no longer sit alone in a home office. They get to learn from somebody. They get to go to lunch with somebody. They're not alone. And so they set up this WeWork facility, and what's happened so far in Tulsa is the average people coming in, the family's income is $106,000. They're coming here, they're falling in love with Tulsa because they find out it's not as expensive to live there as it is San Francisco, New York. They find out the people are really nice, and they're sitting next to people in this WeWork facility, and they're starting to form relationships, and they're starting to actually form companies together. And so it's created growth in Tulsa. So the first thing I want to talk to the mayor about here is, hey, could we think about something here? So that's one. So that basically fights population, but say bring them in. The second is we don't have to be limited by our borders, and I know I'm about to put a name out there that many of you have heard, and I understand there's sort of pros and cons on this, but I've been enamored with Southern New Hampshire University, who was landlocked, who completely reimagined themselves, and they've grown their enrollment 80% in the last 10 years. And they went with online and on campus, and they have completely reimagined themselves in a way that's incredible. And then you don't have to worry about just being here, and I know we're talking about that. And then the third I would say is if we build this school the way Marshall has already been great, and we think of things like experimentation and design, I think the next generation of entrepreneurs will want to come here. And they will come here and they want to start jobs, and that will also reverse population decline. And there's a school who's done it, Babson College. For a decade, I just sat next to the president for 4 hours and had dinner with her and asked her to share anything she would be willing to share, and she said, we'd be happy to expose anything we can to you. They are the entrepreneurship flagship, but they have limitations, and Marshall actually has more assets. And so I think we could actually do it even better. So I think the population thing is a reality, but I don't think it's an epitaph. I think it's an opportunity.
This is the last question in my list, and then we will open up to questions from you all. It's increasingly becoming, universities are merely a place to get students to learn how to learn. There is an increasing focus on getting that inquisitiveness, being curious, like you mentioned, and enabling students to continually learn in their lifetime so that they can be lifelong learners and grow in their populations and so on. Because the jobs that many of our students will be working on down the line haven't been invented yet. What can we do to ensure that we are in the lifelong learning business as a college of business?
This is why I'm so excited about what you've taken on, and Ben and the team with what you're doing with the Innovation Center, the I Center, and I was just telling them, it's a best practice. I know that when we had the chance to come here a couple years ago, it was sort of a catalyst, but what has come back as a result is a best practice. I've shared it in the Valley. I'll tell you, other universities are super interested in what you're doing. And now I think the real key is, can we actually systematize it if that's what you choose to do as a faculty? It's going to be something you're going to have to think about. But Astro Teller, by the way, the name is real, Astro. At least he's not like Judy or, Judy Jetson.
Yeah.
Astro. Hey, we're Astro. Astro Teller runs Google X, and that is where the autonomous driving is coming out, and Google Glass and all the parts of Google that's not the search engine. And he just spoke this past Saturday night at an event that I was in Sea Island, Georgia. And they asked him, what are the things you try to create in your environment? And he said, I want us all to act like 6-year-olds. Because when you're 6, all you have are questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is that candy sticky? Why is this and why is that? And everything is exciting. And then we put you in school. And we beat it out of you. Well, the experimentation culture is designed to bring the 6-year-old back in all of us, where everything is a possibility. You're not allowed to pick one idea. You have to pick 7 ideas. You run experiments. You get your hands dirty. You fall down. You get a Band-Aid on your boo-boo. You get back up. That's the opportunity. And by the way, that creates lifelong learning. Right. If we come out of this university with these design thinking skills, they will be the best positioned students in the world to be able to work at Amazon, which, by the way, runs these small teams called 2 Pizza teams where they're completely empowered, but they have to be able to do design thinking to be able to drive their program forward. Google's looking for the same thing, so is Intuit. So I think we really can create those skills, and that will create lifelong learning.
That's exciting. I mean, this is great in terms of just thinking and reflecting and moving forward in a way that can make us truly special. Let's open up to the questions from faculty and staff. If you are going to ask a question, I guess if you could come up somewhere. Let's see if the mic, we can take the mic and be heard more easily. And please do introduce yourself as you ask a question.
You mentioned coding as a skill. Should that be something you think we should require of all incoming students, that they do take a coding class?
He's Rick Weibel, professor of MIS.
Yes, I do. One of the things, by the way, I think everyone may be aware, John Chambers, a fellow West Virginian, has leaned into WVU, and of course, my family and I are hopeful we can partner with you all here at Marshall. And I called John and said, look, let's get together and maybe for the first time, let's see if we can make 1 + 1 = 11. Early days are looking a little rocky, but we'll figure that out over time. But I think that the headline is we all fundamentally see the same thing, which is we need to get coding into K through 12. And so my wife and I did just get the chance to get iPads and computers into Canova Elementary, which is a school I went to, so that the kids can start to learn. And from there, if that works, we'll figure out how the rest of the state, we can start to make sure everyone has those things. But then the other thing that I would say that I'm inspired by is the schools that I have been trying to learn more from so I can just share with Avi. And it's not answers, it's, hey, Avi, here's something interesting. We might want to look at that. they're starting to have a bridge between the engineering school and the business school. Now, I realize there needs to be specialization, but there's also an ability to work across, and so I do think that it is something we should not only start to expect of students coming in, but maybe even in the university thinking about how we work across the two and have coding and business school working together. And I do think WVU is doing that right now. As I've spoken to Javier and President Gee, they're starting to do that. So I would just be challenging ourselves to say there's something there we might want to think about.
And you had mentioned to us about a class at Harvard, the coding for non-coders.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really awesome.
Now, you want to talk about humbling yourself. Can anybody name, like, who is Harvard's greatest nemesis?
Yale.
Yale? Yeah, well, I know. It depends, right? That's right. So what's amazing is the most popular course at Harvard right now is called CS50. The students refer to it as coding for non-coders, because it's basically a basic program that teaches everybody a little bit of coding, but then those who want to go on to be engineering students, go into the engineering school, but everybody gets foundational school. It's taught, by the way, by a non-tenured professor, which is highly unusual at Harvard for a program that successful. And what was so amazing was its reputation spread so quickly that Yale University called Harvard and asked if they can license the program. It is now the most popular program at Yale, taught by a Harvard professor. Oh, yes. And it is now the #1 class on both university campuses. But both are making it foundational as a part of a freshman curriculum for people coming in. By the way, I think we can license it because I spoke to them. So if we're interested in that, we ought to consider it.
Yeah. Questions?
Not that I get excited. I won't say that because maybe you went to Ivy League schools. But anytime someone tells me, "Oh, Ivy League," I said, "Yeah. The only difference between you and me is your education costs $200,000 more, and I have a better football team."
Exactly.
Sorry.
Three things, Brad. One, I'm glad you haven't lost your accent.
Oh, thank you. They tried to get it out of me. They sent me to a school in New York, but it didn't work.
You keep it. It's effective.
Thank you.
Two, when are you going to send Izzy back to us?
Oh, yeah.
And that's a real question.
Yes. Yeah.
But
She's
three,
coming.
the big initiatives in higher ed today, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's AI, it's data management, and it's supply chain management and things like that. What's next?
Yes.
I think a risk is in thinking that we need to get competency in those levels those areas before we think of anything else. But what else should we be thinking about while we're gaining competency in those areas?
Great. I love it. Thank you for the question. First of all, I'm glad I didn't lose my accent either. For a while, they had convinced me, in software terms, a bug is something that doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and a feature is something you actually get paid for. And early on, I was convinced by an employer that I needed to go to New York and take vocal training because it made me sound less educated to speak the way I did, and you could see how successful that was. The first 5 years, I hung my head and thought it was a bug until people started to say, "Who was that kid that presented with that funny accent?" And I said, "Wow, this is a feature," and I've gotten paid every day since. So it's good. Izzy is like me. She may be in California, her heart hasn't left. So she and I still get together. I'm still spending time with her. She calls it the Power Hour, and we share a book. We read a book each time we get together, and we do a book report, and we talk about things. She's coming back here, I think, in a couple weeks. And her sister's running for student body, so I'm close with the whole family. She'll be back. It's not if, it's when. But right now she's got dragons to slay, and she's doing it. She's lighting the Silicon Valley on fire. And it's good for Marshall because she is iconic out there and a strong woman, which I love. The third is, I think the answer lies in what we're talking about, which is creating the design thinking, because we don't know what's around the corner. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, data and analytics, supply chain, we talked about platforms and ecosystems, the power of the crowd, but all of those came about because people ran experimentations and they fell in love with the problem and not our solution. Our founder was famous when he created Quicken back in 1983 because he watched his wife struggle to balance the family checkbook, and he said there has to be a better way, and he created a product on a DOS screen. And someone said, "You're a technology company." And he said, "No, I'm not. I'm a customer-obsessed company. If a pencil would have solved the problem, we would have made pencils." And the only way you come up with AI and the other stuff is by teaching this experimentation. And then I think what will happen is the curriculum will emerge. Right now, blockchain is one of those things. And so, really learning the fundamentals of blockchain, which right now Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is still being formed, but blockchain is the underpinnings of the next chapter of cybersecurity. So I love your question, and I think it's really thinking about the capability that produces those new things. Thank you. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you, Brad. I'm now serving as president of the West Virginia Roundtable, which you will be meeting with in a month, and
Great.
Representing CEOs of businesses all around West Virginia. And what I hear from those CEOs is their days and calendars just get so filled up, as is true of everyone in this room, that it's hard to take that time to think more proactively. Just, it's easier just to work on your to-do list.
Yes.
How do you carve out the time I know you have to do things on your to-do list, but how do you carve out the time to do the other?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is actually one of the most common questions you get when you're talking to fellow CEOs, but it's also the most common question I get when I'm talking to an employee. And we've had to really step back and ask ourselves, and the reality is in the world there are 3 resources that you usually need to make things happen: money, people, and time. You can usually get more money, even if you get a relative to lend you some money, or a department head or a dean who'll give you a little extra money. People, you can usually get people to volunteer, even interns, like we said, students going out, but you can never get more time. 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, 365, that's it. So of all the areas you really need to manage the most rigorously, it's time. And so a lesson and a technique that I've learned and I've applied is take my time and be clear about where I'm going to spend it, allocate my 100 points. And so for me as CEO, I put 40% of my points into product, so product strategy reviews and company strategy and staff meetings, so 40% in running the company. 30% was in growing and developing talent. So every week I would meet with 12 employees in a skip level chat. I would ask them 3 questions. What's getting better than it was 6 months ago? What's getting worse than it was 6 months ago? And what's the one thing you think I should know that you think I'm not aware of so I can go fix it? So that's 30%. So now I've got 40 up in kind of product reviews because we're a product company, 30% in growing and developing talent, 20% is outside of our 4 walls. So I belong on the board of Nordstrom, the retailer, a company called SurveyMonkey. I'm also a CEO roundtable participant. Every quarter, the roundtable, the CEOs in the Silicon Valley get together. And that, I go and I attend those meetings and I type Uncle Brad's book report. And I bring it back to the company and I share the lessons I learned from outside. And then the last 10% is my personal learning. So I read the Wall Street Journal every morning. I watch the opening bell on CNBC and I read 1 book a week. And the book, I do a book report, and that's where Izzy got this power hour, and then I share that with the group. So if you take that, I'm learning in the product strategy reviews about what are the things coming around the corner and what did a competitor do that I didn't anticipate. I'm learning from the employees when I say what's getting better, what's getting worse, what's the one thing you think I should know. I'm learning from the outside companies whose boards I sit on and other CEOs, and I'm learning from the books I'm reading and the periodicals I'm reading. And all that keeps you sort of in an uncomfortable position. The best piece of advice I got was the night I was becoming CEO. I spoke to a veteran CEO who was stepping down after 17 years, and I said, "What's the secret?" He said, "When you go to bed every night, I want you to think of 2 things. Am I driving enough change to keep our company relevant for the next decade? Or am I driving too much change too fast that our team can't keep up? And then if you can sleep, you're not doing your job right." So, best thing is the 100-point exercise. Now, here's how you make it pay off. Whoever does your calendar for you, in my case, I have an executive assistant. She color codes every meeting on my calendar, either blue for 40, red for 30, green for the 20, or yellow for the 10. And every month she creates a pie chart, and I see if my time actually was in the right ratio, and if it wasn't, I adjust. I know it sounds very rigorous, but it's the only way I figured out how to do it because I couldn't manufacture a longer day.
Right. One of the things if I may interject with a question is, global reach is a huge part of Intuit. You are a major global company, and one of the things we were reading on what you use is a tool called Brainstorm.
Yes.
To maintain in touch with the global partners and so on. Could you talk a little bit about that? How do you maintain in touch with such a large global company?
Yeah, so all the employees at the company are taught design thinking. We call it Design for Delighted into it. And we rolled out 10% unstructured time back in 2008 when I stepped into the CEO role. Google gives 20%. And if you take this and put it in the context of the prior discussion, every one of our leaders said, "Are you kidding me? We're already behind schedule getting the product out. I need people to work harder, and you want to give them 10% off." And then we learned what Google learned. If you tell somebody right over there is a project they can work on that makes their heart beat fast, they'll do their day job faster. And many times their 10% time happens on nights and weekends, because they'll work on something if they're excited about it. They don't care about whether the 10% came Monday through Friday or not. And then what that did is it produced this environment where everyone's trained on how to run an experiment, and then they get this time to basically go run that experiment, and they know that I have a CEO fund, a venture capital fund, that I'll fund any winning idea for 90 days. But one of the things they ran into is they would have an idea like, "I want to solve opioid addiction." And the engineer was in Bangalore, the designer who wanted to work on it was in Paris, France, and the marketer was in San Francisco.
Right.
And they couldn't find a way to work the time zones. And so guess what they did? They invented a product called Brainstorm. And Brainstorm is basically a virtual collaboration environment where they go in and they share with each other the documents, and they could update them, and they could basically all opt in. And that's what allowed this virtual connectivity around the globe. And that was born out of unstructured time. They created a tool to solve their own problem, and then we ended up loving it. And now we've licensed it to Bain Consulting and a lot of other companies. And so it came out of necessity.
Questions?
May I ask another?
Of course.
I didn't know if you were looking behind me or at me.
Yeah.
And this is not meant to make the faculty here feel uneasy, but very few discussions that I've been involved in really relate to faculty development. It's kind of university leadership and students. And you talked about the fear of change. The fear is greatest when it looks like you have to change. Across the country in higher ed, how have successful schools encouraged their faculty to embrace the change and not fear the change?
Right. Well, first of all, I have to say, as I've gotten into the education learning zone, I'm certainly not into the education answer zone. Anything I've shared today is either a hypothesis that could be proven and tested or disproven and tested, or it's something somebody else is doing. But I can tell you where I'm not. I come from a family of educators. All of my cousins teach in elementary, in high school, and I also always aspired to one day hoping that I could teach at college. And so my view is teachers are, and faculty and professors are the secret sauce. But what's happening now is this generation has grown up after the invention of the iPhone. What's happened is their brains have formed something that I think I've shared before called continuous partial attention. This generation can do something that our brains can't do. Our brains multitask. They're able to do simultaneous things at the same time, so concurrently do multiple things. But there's a shadow to that. 4 years ago, the average attention span of a millennial was 12 seconds. It's now 8 seconds. A goldfish is 9 seconds. That's the real deal. And so if we think they're going to want to listen to us talk for 50 minutes and take notes, that's just not the way they learn anymore. They switch back and forth between devices 27 times in 1 hour when they're left on their own. So it's high interactivity. They can process quickly, not the way we typically did. And so what I'm seeing happen as I go study these other universities is the first thing is professors respect other professors because they know the domain and the craft. They know the pain you go through. They know the sacrifice you made to get to where you are. And when they go see somebody else trying something different, then they're willing to try it themselves, much more so than if they listen to me, who's never taught a class. They go learn from each other. So the first thing I would say is they're leaving the campus. This is why I love like the Tulsa, Oklahoma, borrowed from Vermont. I love that Yale borrowed from Harvard. I love that the SNU, Southern New Hampshire University. So they're all kind of learning from each other. I'd say that's the first thing. But then the second thing that I am seeing happen is the role of leadership is to really put the grand challenge out there, give them a framework, and then step out of the way and let them do their magic. And then only interject yourself when there's an obstacle they can't overcome. Peter Drucker once said, the bottleneck is always at the top of the bottle. That is true in business. I'm usually the one that causes more friction, and my job needs to be to remove friction. So the question you have to ask yourself, is that the same in universities? And I don't know. But what I do know is if we pose the problem, and then we allow them to use a set of techniques to solve the problem, and then we help when they get stuck, that's the way this generation wants to learn, and that's the success model I've seen starting to really take off in other schools. And that is not to take a shot at the current model. That's a testable hypothesis, by the way. We could try it, and if it doesn't work, say, well, that was a good idea that didn't work.
Exactly. One of Intuit's core values we always read, and I think we can adopt in it as well, is be passionate, right? Personally embrace and role model change. And then look at insights and inspiration and initiative, and then perfect your craft every day. How do we imbibe the passion for change with the actual, with the reality of the day again in the context of where we are, and kind of move forward and accomplish some of these goals?
Well, I think my lessons and my experience are people do not want to run from something, they want to run to something. John F. Kennedy, speechwriter, once said that if you want to be a leader, you have to be better than a communicator, you have to be a translator of dreams. You need to be a dealer in hope. Our state needs hope right now. I'm personally tired of seeing 50th out of 50, 49 out of 50, 50 out of 50, 49 out of 50, but I actually don't see that as a glass half empty. I see that as nothing but upside. And if we truly set our sights on what we can go do that the world needs and the state needs, I think it's a great opportunity. By the way, the most common phrase in the Silicon Valley is if you want to have a big business, solve a big problem. If you want to have a little business, solve a little problem. If you want to have a successful university, solve a big problem. And I'd start right here at home. We could be the iconic university in the world if we can bring the state out of this sort of perennial situation it's in. And I really fundamentally believe the answers are there. I can tell you this, the reason why Izzy Rogner's lighting the world on fire and her sister lit the world on fire with internships and all the other West Virginians that come out is they ain't seen nothing like us. The number one success factor everyone tests out there is perseverance and grit. You take a kid out of this area and you tell them that if they can dig their way through this, they can come out the other side, they'll dig. A lot of other kids don't do that. They didn't have to fight through what we fight through. So I'm a big believer we have nothing but upside.
Most of our students want to remain in West Virginia. We see
I
that
want
all
them
the
to
time.
remain. I want to come home.
And create an environment that helps them to do that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's what the entrepreneurship competition is about. All these new ideas that we are coming about here will hopefully sustain people in the state and help them to grow.
Well, let me give you on this one. I'm passionate about this, and I apologize. This is where opinion definitely comes in. A shared entrepreneurship. 60% of the entire world works in a business with fewer than 100 employees. The entire world, 60% of all employees. 75% of all new jobs are created in startups. It's even more in Appalachia. I got a phone call from the state saying, you sit with Jeff Bezos multiple times a year, can you get us on the list of HQ2? That conversation lasted about 30 seconds. They're not coming to West Virginia. There's not enough here. There's not enough flat land. You can't scale and grow. But you know what can come from here? Entrepreneurs. They're the backbones of our community. They're the backbone of the world economy. And by the way, the next Amazon could get created here. And I love this conversation that happened last week. We had Steve Case, who was the founder of AOL. He now has started a program with J.D. Vance. Anyone read Hillbilly Elegy?
Yeah.
Okay, J.D. Vance wrote that. And so J.D. and Steve Case, and I'm joining their program, have started a program called Rise of the Rest. And they went out to the 300 and some cities who bid on Amazon's HQ2 and lost. And he gave them a grand challenge. Take half the money you were prepared to give to Amazon in tax benefits, take half the time that you invested in trying to put together that contract, and put it into your entrepreneurship programs in your universities, and you will create the next Amazon. Our history was in the mountains, and I'm proud of that. Our future is in the clouds and in the opportunities we can create by using these new technologies and entrepreneurship, and I think we ought to create the next Amazon right here. I tell you, Izzy and others can do it, and so are all these students coming out, so I think we ought to crank up the engine, let their freak flag fly. we wear you out? Okay, go ahead.
Rick Lively again.
Yeah, Rick.
The question came up of faculty development.
Yes.
That is an issue. We are lifelong learners, but we usually have blinders on. And we want to focus in a narrow area. And as I look at the future, I see that more and more occupations are going to be a little narrower than we've had in the past because of the great expansion of knowledge. Any suggestions on how we can figure out where we should be running to in terms of personal development?
Yes. I can only tell you, and it's a little bit of a derivative of the answer I gave, and I'm having to walk a fine line, and I'm sure several of you, if not many of you, are sitting there saying, he sure sounds like he has more answers than questions. I promise you I don't. I have a lot of scar tissue, a lot of mistakes, but I do have some best practices that we have come across over time that we've borrowed from others that have worked, and I think they're applicable to universities, and that's why I've spent the last few years studying these other universities. And I'm saying, well, they're doing exactly what we do in Intuit or at Amazon, so wow, maybe this will work at Marshall. But here was what my hope was when Avi and I talked about his vision, which I bought into, and just love what you all are thinking about. I think it would be wonderful if the faculty actually picked the universities that we want to learn from based upon the things we think could be a part of the future and formed small teams and went out and did what we talked about. Go study from your peers and seek to understand before you seek to be understood. That's an old Socrates, or Aristotle or Socrates, one of them. And literally just observe and learn, and then come back, and just as we would with publishing, write a narrative and then have a discussion to say what are the best ideas and be a part of creating the change. By the way, that's the lifelong learning that I think will happen. And what also happens is when you're out there, you're going to discover the new trends. Every year, Steve Jobs would fly to China, and he would attend their version of the Consumer Electronics Program. And then he would come back because he would see a technology in search of a problem over there. But over here, he knew the problems, and sometimes those two would intersect, and he would bring their technology and match it with our problem and create something called an iPhone. And so if you go out, you will observe things, and some things will be a great idea, just not ready for prime time, and other things you're going to say, wow, I just saw something at that school that I think West Virginia is really better suited for. No one's listening into it in San Francisco because they have all these riches, but that could really solve the problem here. So I think if we found a way to do a 100-point exercise on our time and have X% of our time as faculty going out and learning from the best wheel makers, or maybe even taking coding boot camp. Have everybody, by the way, I'm about to sign up. There's a 6-week program at MIT that's artificial intelligence for non-coders. Board members are signing up for this, and I'm going to sign up for it and go on and just see if I can learn and expose my brain to something that I didn't know. And so I think those are the kinds of opportunities. You are lifelong learners, but sometimes I think our curricula focus us into the same thing. Someone once told me, you don't want to have 30 years of 1 year of experience. The same thing every year. You don't want to reimagine, and the best way to do that is fall in love with the problem again.
Based on our discussions, we have created a list of schools we want to visit, and we have talked about it, and we'll discuss it more.
Yeah.
And there are other universities. We just went to UNC Chapel Hill and came back last week, looked at their experiential learning. There are a bunch of schools, including Babson, for example, that we are planning to visit, Temple for online. Would it help if our faculty also spend some time in companies?
Oh, yes. It's funny you said that. I was about to go to 2 models that have really inspired me, both of which I'm sure you know. Toyota leaning into the community colleges in Kentucky, and the Kaiser Foundation leaning into community colleges out west. Mm-hmm. And what they've done is they've said the schools aren't producing the skills that we need, and I would love to ask if you could create a curriculum or a major in your school that do this, and what they're doing in return is they're guaranteeing employment. Now imagine going through a school and knowing that you don't have to worry about a job coming out. And that's just an incredible idea, and universities are really, I think, that would be a beautiful match made in heaven. The reason why I'm excited about design thinking for Marshall is because this is the way the technology sector and the artificial intelligence sector operates, as experimentation. If we become the place that this is known for, other than Stanford's idea design school, I think that we could really have this channel into guaranteed employment. I'd be happy to bring some fellow CEOs out here and have career fairs and stuff if we figure out a way to make that happen.
That's fantastic. I think we would have another maybe 5 minutes or so of questions before we break for informal discussions, lunch, and so on. So any other questions from us here in this room? Well, this gives us, go ahead.
Brad, on a personal note, when you reflect back over your career from the time you took that job at Pepsi until now, what characteristics about you made you select, why me? Why were you selected for all of the positions as you moved up the ladder? And what can we tell our students?
You know, I really don't know. I don't. You talk about a blind squirrel finding an acorn. I don't know, but I did get some advice along the way that I think helped. Well, first of all, I have always been intellectually curious. So I'll back up. I had 3 formative moments in my life. At the age of 6, I watched a mountain burn, and I watched a community come together, and I learned that life was a team sport. That we're all angels with one wing, and the way we fly is by holding on to each other. And so right off the bat, I knew the power of community and the power of we are instead of I am. The second is in the 4th grade, I lost a spelling bee to a little redheaded girl who I had a crush on, and she wrote a note and said, "You can't be my boyfriend because you're stupid." She is a doctor in Cincinnati, Ohio now, so she wasn't wrong. She was definitely smarter. But I went home that night. My IQ didn't go up, but my work ethic did. I began studying for the midterm the first day of the semester. Grit. The third was in 9th grade when I had a bully that, as I mentioned earlier, and my dad enrolled me in martial arts, but I learned 2 things when I stood up and lost. First is courage isn't the absence of fear, it's a willingness to stand up and face the things that scare you and to learn from those lessons. And the second is to always be a champion for the underdog. And so I used what I learned in martial arts to always make sure anyone around me was no longer a victim. And I wasn't out there, fighting all the time, but I always saw opportunities to diffuse a situation and try to help someone who was being persecuted. I think those 3 foundational lessons helped me. But then the piece of advice I got was to always volunteer for the job nobody else wants. And so I was willing to do that because everyone hires these young people and they all want to work on AI and ML and blockchain, but they also have these legacy software technology products built for the PC. And if you go volunteer for the job nobody else wants, first of all, you're going to learn something because it's usually getting less resources every day because they're pulling it off and putting on the new thing. So you got to get scrappy and innovative. But you also earn a reputation for being the go-to person. And the bosses start to say, wow, every time we tap Smith, he's willing to go in and do it. And somehow he makes a silk purse out of a sow's ear. So let's figure out how we can put him on this thing. And next thing you know, you start to get opportunities that everyone else is going, why not me? Well, because you always wanted to do the cool stuff, you weren't willing to do the tough stuff. So I think that probably has been it. And I really learned it from my dad. When my dad became the mayor at 53, he had been downsized after 26 years at Nestle. Didn't want to voluntarily step down, wasn't ready, we didn't have the money to retire. And he became the mayor back home, and he did something no other mayor in Canova had done. He rode the sanitation routes every Tuesday with the people who picked up the trash. And I asked him, I said, Dad, why do you do that? And he said, 2 reasons, son. You'll get to know your people if you spend 8 hours in the cab of a truck with them, and you'll get to know your city better if you ride up and down the alleys. So when I got hired by Pepsi, my first job was to manage 6 Teamsters who delivered soft drinks in the morning. And you know what I did? I rode the routes with them in Michigan, and when it was snowing, I helped them load the trucks, and I helped them stack the cases. And every contest that came up, they gave a little extra effort for me, so we won every contest, and I got promoted. And it was simply because I helped them when they needed help, and they helped me when I needed help. I think that's it. And we teach that at West Virginia. That's us. We are Marshall, baby.
Yeah, I'll finish with the quote that we read from somewhere, and these are some of the advice that we read you received early on from your father. Surround yourself with people smarter than you. Volunteer for assignments no one else wants. And make sure you can pay your bills.
Oh, yeah.
I think this brings us right into the heart of all the conversation.
All right.
Well, thank you so much. This has been inspiring. This has been, absolutely transformational. It has opened our minds and made us think and reflect. And this is a start of a long journey that we will have together. With your support, I think we will be at a very different place, and we'll be a very different college and university.
May I say one thing?
Please.
I am so proud to be associated with you. Of all the things in my life, all the things in my family's life, my mother and father, there is no greater source of pride than to know that Marshall University is preparing the next generation to do amazing things. And I've had the chance to surround myself with some pretty fun people along the way, but none better than you. You are doing God's work, and I want to thank you for what you do every day, and I want to thank you for allowing me to come in and talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you.